Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. The last few days I've been reading about the yamas, or the yogic ethical principles that Tommy Rosen discusses in Recovery 2.0. And today I'm talking about the fourth yama, brahmacharya. And this yama is about sex. And sex is an important part of life, and it's also an important thing for us to discuss in recovery. I'm going to read what Tommy says about this first. Historically, brahmacharya has been interpreted as abstinence from or control of sexual activity. A more modern interpretation would be energy moderation. The big question brahmacharya asks is, how do you choose to use your energy? Being wise about how and where one uses one's energy, particularly one's sexual energy, is an art form in this life. Observance of brahmacharya means we use our sexual power responsibly. We try to keep it sacred. We are encouraged not to separate the sexual part of our life from the spiritual part of our life. To do so seems to ask for trouble. So, for many of us, and and I'm not just talking about addiction now. We grow up if you're living in America, at least, or Western culture, you grow up in a society where sex is all around you. Sex appeal is a huge part of marketing. It's in television shows. It's everything is made to look sexy. We're constantly bombarded with sexual messages, and yet many of us are raised, and I was not raised this way, but many people I know were raised to look at sex as something that is also kind of a bad thing, a naughty thing that you don't engage in unless you're married, and even then really should only engage in if you're trying to create another life. And we get all these very confusing, conflicting messages about sex. And what I believe happens is a lot of people develop dysfunctional sexual identities, and they start to treat sex more as a commodity than as a sacred act, is what Tommy refers to it here. And so when we get into recovery, we have to start deconstructing this, because things like sex addiction and porn addiction are very important things to watch out for as you enter recovery. They can quickly come in and take the place of a chemical addiction, because because things like sex and porn, they mimic particular chemical reactions and neurological reactions in the brain that you might get from something like alcohol and drugs. They also allow for a way of connection with human beings that, if done in a certain way, can be a very meaningful connection. But depending on, if you are, for example, paying someone to have sex with you, then that connection that you're having with them is really more of an illusion. And so we've really got to look at what do we do with sex? How do we treat sex? And some of the questions that Tommy raises in this section are things like, if we are in a monogamous relationship, how should we behave toward a member of the opposite sex who we find attractive? What is a responsible way to manage that energy and the powerful feelings that go along with it? What if we're single? Then what do we do? Is it okay to pursue or allow ourselves to be pursued by everyone we come across whom we find attractive? So clearly, it's part of what we have to do is learn how to set boundaries for ourselves and learn how to define the different people that we run across. If you find someone, for example, if you're in a monogamous relationship and you find someone in a recovery meeting who you find is attractive and who you start to get along with and you start to have feelings for, that would be a good opportunity to set some boundaries. Most of us are not used to that. Most of us are used to a sexual environment where we pursue what we want until we get it. We are not used to practicing things like abstinence or trying to direct our energy. And so it's a very alien thing for a lot of us. And that's why in the fourth step of a 12-step program, you spend some time talking about what does an ideal sex relationship look like for you. And for those of us in a monogamous relationship, for example, we might say that an ideal sexual relationship looks like monogamy. It looks like just being with one person once we've committed to them. Commitment might also be another part of that. And so when we find ourselves attracted to other people, we can call up that ideal sex relationship and say, but remember, this is not pursuing this person wouldn't be the right thing to do, because I've said this clearly does not fit into my ideal sexual relationship. And that's not easy, because our emotions and our instinct really, and really our primal instinct pushes us to pursue anyone who we find attractive, who we feel is a good match for us. And so it takes practice, and nobody's perfect. And, you know, I think it's fair to say that all of us have been in that situation where we find ourselves attracted to people who we probably, for one reason or another, should not be. But the purpose of this particular yama is to look at how we start to direct that energy. And when I rationally realize, you know, we live in this culture where it's one of the dumbest sayings that we have in this culture is follow your heart. You know, if I followed my heart, I never would have ended up getting sober. If I followed what my mind and my instincts and everything told me to do, I would still be using and drinking, you know. And so this comes to our sexual relationships as well. Follow your heart is not the best advice all the time, because sometimes your heart tells you to do some things that you should not be doing. And we've got to find that balance between what our emotions and what our instinct is telling us to do and what we can rationally see as an ideal sexual relationship. And so a lot of times it's important for us to learn how to redirect energy, how to recognize that, yes, I want this, but I'm not going to engage in it because it's not right for me. That practice of restraint is important not just in sexual matters, but in all matters in life. Being able to restrain from, for instance, buying something you can't afford. When I was in my addiction, I didn't have limits. If I couldn't afford something, it went on a credit card. I mean, as far as I was concerned, I could afford it as long as my card went through. I didn't worry about the long-term consequences. And so we have to, in recovery, I've had to move out of that and really have a ideal about the way I want to structure my spending and things like that. And it's the same thing with our sexual energy. We have to have a clear picture of how we want to structure the way we spend and direct that energy, so that when we're doing so, it's not in a way that's going to cause pain for us or other people later down the line. This is a really important one. I have not covered any, just a tiny percentage of what could be discussed here. It's really important, if you are working a 12-step program, that when you get to the part of step 4 where you're discussing your sex life with your sponsor, it's extremely important that you are 100% open and honest about your past and about your feelings and about everything. And I would also argue it's important to have someone in your life who you can go to talk about sex and things like that, because having someone who can understand and help you sort through the complicated feelings around sex, it's a critical part of recovery. And especially as you start to move into a more stable place, it helps to have those people to help you sort through all of the conflicting emotions that might come up as you encounter the people you'll inevitably encounter who you find attractive, who you seem to click with. So that's it for today. I hope this topic made sense. I'm certainly not an expert on it, but I think it is an important one for us to explore, talk about some. I'll be back tomorrow with the last yama.